can
Yeah,
see.
like that.
Yeah.
Ready? Have a wonderful webinar, everyone.
Thank you.
Good day and a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Yolanda Allen. I'm the past president of the Barbados Town Planning Society, and I greet you today on behalf of the Barbados Town Planning Society. It is World Town Planning Day. And today we are going to be looking and focusing on the topic of complete communities and reimagining solutions for our housing, settlement, and our communities. And to bring you a welcome from the society, on behalf of the society, I introduce to you our current president, Mr. Andy Gill. Andy?
Thanks, Yolanda. Hello and welcome to our free webinar event. On behalf of the Barbados Town Planning Society, I am delighted to be able to welcome all of you to our annual World Town Planning Day webinar, which is entitled Complete Communities, Reimagining Settlement, Communities and Housing Solutions, which is being held this year on the 75th anniversary of World Town Planning Day. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. We at the Barbados Town Planning Society wish to salute all planners, planning, and associated professionals, both locally and globally, who are dedicated to balancing social, environmental, and economic issues for the betterment of society and humankind. The global theme for World Town Planning Day 2024 is Home Start with Planning, and today's webinar follows this theme closely. The provision of adequate homes for all is a challenge across our region. Our theme today focuses on the role of planners, planning, and associated professions in delivering housing that meets the needs of our communities, as well as helping to create equitable, inclusive, and sustainable solutions for all. The development and growth patterns over the last 2 decades are not sustainable over the long term. The UN Habitat 3 New Urban Agenda requires us to include adaptation to the climate crisis, building resiliency, promoting healthy communities, planning for aging community, efficient provision of infrastructure, among other things. And although our strategic physical development policies do generally aim to create livable and vibrant communities, help is needed from all planners and development professionals to truly deliver and even improve on these goals. On World Town Planning Day 2024, the Barbados Town Planning Society invites you to join in the conversation on planning for our current and future settlement needs. And we thank you again for making the time to participate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy, for that warm welcome. And this morning, as you may have noted from the flyer that was circulated, we have 4 speakers. We have Ms. Paula Smith, Dr. Albert Best, Ms. Michelle Strawn, and Mr. Jonathan Platt. I'm going to introduce each one of these speakers just before they speak, just before they make their presentations. And we're going to start off with Ms. Paula Smith. Paula is going to give us some insights into some of the strategies and policies that have been laid out for us in Barbados as part of our planning framework or forward planning framework. Paula is a chartered town planner for over 20 years with an interest in environmental impact assessments. She worked for the Environmental Agency for 7 years and joined the Town and Country Planning Development Office in 2001. She has managed all sections of development management, enforcement, and forward planning. And she has worked in the Prime Minister's office as a planner for 5 years. And she's now at the Planning and Development Department, responsible for the forward planning section. So we warmly welcome Paula and ask you, Paula, to share your views on complete communities, especially as it relates to the physical development plans, strategies, and policies that have been laid out for us. Thank you, Paula. Welcome.
Thank you, Yolanda. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, Paula. We're not seeing anything right now.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to bring up the presentation. It seems to have disappeared. Please bear with me just a minute.
So as Paula gets herself ready, I just take the opportunity to remind you of how important it is for us to look at our communities and our settlement areas. Our natural population is declining. At the same time, we know on the political side of things, we are speaking of increasing our working population through a managed policy. So it's important that settlements be healthy and prosperous for those who are Barbadians and for our visitors. And so it's an important discussion that we need to focus on. And it has very many dimensions to it, because a healthy community is more than just where we live and where we shop and where we recreate. It's a combination of things, including mobility and access to mobility. So we are going to start off with that background that Paula is going to give us. Paula, any joy with your
No,
presentation?
I am not sure what has happened here.
If anything, Yolanda, if you want to give Paula a couple of minutes and let her skip to the other presenter.
Yes, we can do that. We can certainly go on to Dr. Albert Best and let him give us some background and some framework for complete communities. So Dr. Best, I call upon you now as you are an experienced architect, planner, and project manager. Dr. Best is the current vice president of the Barbados Town Planning Society also. He holds degrees in architecture and urban planning, including a master in urban planning and a doctor of science in architecture with distinction. He's a founding director of the architectural and planning firm Arcus Design Group, Inc., based in Barbados since 1998, and previously worked for several years in New York City, where he was awarded 2 citations for design excellence for the Society of American Registered Architects. Dr. Best is a past president of the Barbados Institute of Architects and a past chairman of the Barbados Architects Registration Board. He is a fellow of both the Chartered Institute of Building and the Association for Project Management. He's a full member of the American Institute of Architects and the Royal Institute of British Architects, and is a lifetime member of the International Society of City and Regional Planners. Dr. Best is also credited with several published articles on architectural issues. Dr. Best, I invite you to give us your views on complete communities. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Master of Ceremonies. Salutations to my colleagues. I want to acknowledge the president and the guild. I'm charged, guys, with making a little contribution. I was told that I'm supposed to be pretty short. So the theme is homes start with planning. And for my segment, I want to focus a bit on challenges and design considerations for the master planning of affordable residential communities. The agenda that I've established to try to communicate this to you guys would be introduction. We'll start with a little introduction to the challenge. Then we want to highlight the goals of sustainable and inclusive planning. We will look at some past development and growth patterns. Then we would reinforce what Andy spoke about earlier, the guiding framework from the UN Habitat Urban Agenda. We would extract some aspects, strategic aspects of the Barbados National Physical Development strategic policies, and abstracting from that, we would look at some key elements for complete communities, resilient and adaptable community design, and ways to promote healthy communities. Then we would keep it at home where we would look at some domestic case studies. And then we would just have some thoughts on future planning and recommendations. So I'm going to try to do this as fast as I can, because when I went through it, it looks like it can take at least a half an hour, but I would go quickly. So we look at the introduction to the challenge. And we highlight some key points to your global housing needs. Then we look at the local context, which is Barbados, and we can stay grounded to the World Town Planning Day theme. For the introduction to the challenge, and we start with what's happening globally in terms of global housing needs. There's a rising global urban population, housing shortages, and the need for sustainable planning. Globally, we are faced with challenges such as high population density, where there are limited land resources and high demand, which increases density and effectively strains public services and infrastructure. We have the challenge of resource constraints, where limited funding for construction and maintenance impacts quality, durability, and aesthetics. We have environmental and health risks, where poor access to clean water, waste management, and healthcare exacerbates community health issues. Social integration and inclusion is also another challenge, where designing to foster social cohesion and minimize stigmatization is crucial but often overlooked. Infrastructure deficiencies, where inadequate roads, electricity, and sanitation facilities can severely limit residents' quality of life. Then we look at the local context right here in Barbados. Now, historically, master planning for affordable housing in Barbados and the Caribbean has evolved in response to the unique social, economic, and geographic challenges faced by the region. Rooted in colonial era housing systems and influenced by post-independence urbanization, affordable housing in the Caribbean has shifted from basic housing projects to more integrated, community-oriented, and sustainable planning approaches. Today, Barbados-specific challenges can be expressed, like in one statement, as limited land to satisfy a very high housing demand amidst limited funding and high climate vulnerability. Example, hurricanes, freak storms, ash falls, extreme heat, storm surges, etc., etc. And then we stay grounded to the main challenge here at hand for the World Town Planning Day theme. But however, this year's World Town Planning Day's theme highlights the role of planners in creating solutions that are both equitable and inclusive. And this presentation is a small contribution towards this effort. Now, the goals of sustainable and inclusive planning. And we look at 3 bedrocks: sustainable development, resilience in planning, and inclusivity. For sustainable development, I would like to define this in terms of housing that meets current needs without harming future resources. In terms of resilience in planning, we have to be thoughtful in our planning and design so we can protect communities from environmental and economic stress. In terms of inclusivity, our goal here is to create spaces for all people, regardless of age, income, physical ability or disability, and background. Varying concepts and ideologies of these 3 buildings.
Houses isn't clearly green, but it could be clear to the eye, but not. Right. If it could be a whole bunch of concrete down in the pipe.
And you know how to get that clear?
You gotta use
1 second, please. Could all the participants please mute themselves?
All right, thanks for that, Joy. All right, varying concepts and ideologies of these 3 building blocks or themes have been applied in the Caribbean. For as climate change impacts the region disproportionately, sustainable and resilient design principles have become central to master planning. In Barbados and other islands, affordable housing projects today incorporate stormwater management, renewable energy sources, and disaster resilient materials to withstand hurricanes and flood. For instance, partnerships between government agencies and international organizations such as the United Nations Development Program have led to pilot projects that showcase affordable, climate resilient housing in vulnerable communities. Over recent decades, partnerships between government, private developers, and non-governmental organizations have become increasingly important in creating affordable housing communities. In Barbados, programs like the Hope Direct initiative offer affordable home ownership options, which we'll look at some options later, in collaboration with private partners, promoting mixed income communities that foster social integration. These partnerships have helped address funding gaps and provide low-cost housing while embracing community facilities, public transportation, and green spaces. Now we go to past development and growth patterns. We just look at a summary of development trends, impact on the long-term sustainability, and establish a need for a shift. So in terms of examining the history of the trends, we look at the colonial period, where affordable housing options for the region's primarily Afro-Caribbean working class were limited and often inadequate, with many workers living in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. Large plantation estates and rural poverty marked the landscape, leading to a distinct lack of affordable housing infrastructure. As Caribbean nations began moving towards independence in the mid-20th century, housing reform emerged as an essential component of economic and social development. In the post-independent housing initiatives from the 1950s through 1970s, countries like Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago started developing national housing programs aimed at improving living conditions for low and middle income citizens. In Barbados, the government created the National Housing Corporation in 1973 to oversee affordable housing projects, building homes and apartment units to address housing shortages. These initiatives were primarily government-led, emphasizing quantity, unfortunately, over quality to meet the urgent needs of a rapidly urbanizing population. Then we see a rise in the 1980s and 1990s of community-oriented master planning, where Caribbean housing policies began incorporating elements of master planning, shifting from isolated housing units to comprehensive communities. Influenced by global trends in urban planning, Caribbean governments aimed to create more integrated and inclusive neighborhoods that provided basic amenities and services. In Barbados, for instance, developments like Eden Lodge and Silver Hill focus on providing low to middle income housing with accessible community facilities, encouraging a greater sense of community and stability. In addition, organizations like the Caribbean Development Bank began investing in regional housing projects to promote sustainable development, reflecting growing awareness of the importance of resilience against natural disasters. This shift encouraged planners to include considerations for storm and hurricane resistance in affordable housing design. This have impact. There is an impact on long-term sustainability if we keep on this route, as Andy highlighted in his opening remarks. We learned from our past, but we must embrace the need to plan for more sustainable communities to mitigate the impact of a range of social, economic, and environmental challenges. Some of the effects of inadequate community planning are, and these are things we want to mitigate, limited access to basic services, where we will see inadequate infrastructure and limited access to public services. We can also see increased social inequality with segregation and isolation, also stigmatization, You can see traffic congestion and transportation problems with limited public transportation and poor connectivity. We can see environmental degradation with unsustainable development, flooding, and poor drainage. There's also overcrowding and overburdened resources we want to avoid, where we see overcrowded housing and strain on public services. Another factor we want to avoid is security and safety concerns, with crime and social unrest and increased vulnerability in natural disasters. Economic impact, with job accessibility being a problem and decline in property value, and health and well-being, which is a major threat. And we're seeing that now with mental health issues and physical health concerns that we want to mitigate. Aesthetics and community identity is something that's often overlooked, where you can see a loss of cultural heritage and a lack of community cohesion. And then there's the long-term sustainability and resilience, where we can see failure to adapt to future needs and higher maintenance costs. And then political and social frustration, where we see increased public discontent. So there's a need for a shift. And to mitigate the impacts of poor planning on affordable housing communities in Barbados, it's essential for policymakers to adopt integrated and sustainable planning practices that consider social, economic, and environmental factors. This includes ensuring that participation of local communities in the planning process, providing necessary infrastructure, and addressing equity and accessibility concerns to create thriving, inclusive neighborhoods. I'm told that all the time, but I'm continuing. Right. So we have the guidance framework that Andy spoke about earlier regarding the United Nations Habitat New Urban Agenda, of which we would have extracted aspects of it to be our guiding principle. But a little about that, that agenda is a global framework focused on sustainable urban development adopted during the UN Habitat Conference in Ecuador in October 2016. And it aimed to address the rapid urbanization occurring worldwide, promote sustainable cities, and improve the quality of urban life for residents, particularly marginalized groups. It serves as a key tool for achieving the sustainable design goal, particularly number 11, which seeks to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. The new urban agenda is significant because it provides a holistic framework guiding urban development strategies globally, shaping policies on housing, land use, environmental management, and urban mobility. It encourages partnerships across governments, the private sector, and civil society to foster sustainable cities that are adaptable to future challenges. The agenda does not have binding legal power, but offers guidelines and principles that countries can adapt based on their urban development needs. And it promotes regular follow-up to measure progress towards sustainable urbanization. And the key objectives that we extract from it is really climate adaptation, healthy and living communities, aging population needs, efficient infrastructure. And then we have the Barbados National Physical Development Strategic Policies, which Paula will highlight, would highlight more. I was hoping to follow directly after her, but that didn't work out. But what we extract from that is their definition of complete communities and their vision for that, as well as their healthy communities. And word for word, complete communities as defined in the physical development strategic policies is complete communities meet all the needs of residents' daily lives, including a range of housing types, diverse job opportunities, provision of goods and services, and community infrastructure like schools, healthcare, and recreational and open spaces. They are walkable and provide easy access to public transportation. Complete communities are places where everyone from children to seniors can live a fulfilling life. That's extracted from the National Physical Development Strategic Policy. They also identify healthy communities. This is establishing facilities and services provision. A healthy community is one that provides its residents with physical, emotional, and social well-being. And the PDP policies ensure that the development of Barbados actively encourages physical health, such as nutritious, local food markets and cycling infrastructure, emotional health, such as green spaces and fulfilling employment opportunities, and social health, such as community gathering spaces and recreational facilities. So you see how that ties back into the UN agenda. And we still have the challenge of population growth and sustainability here in Barbados, because accommodating future population growth sustainably in Barbados through planning policy comes with several key challenges, because we have limited land availability, environmental vulnerability, infrastructural strain, affordable housing, economic sustainability, social equity, energy and resource management. These are concepts. So planning policies and regulations must address these challenges through integrated, forward-thinking strategies that balance growth with environmental preservation, social equity, and economic sustainability. So from all this, we can identify some key elements of a complete community and then follow some guiding principles for resilience and adaptable community design. So, in terms of the key elements for complete communities, we have housing diversity. So a variety, we would like to see a variety of housing types, apartments, single-family homes, multi-family units to suit different needs. Then there's the accessibility, where a walkable neighborhood with nearby essential services is kind of critical, promote health. And then we have environmental sustainability with the use of eco-friendly building materials and renewable energy. We don't have a lot of indigenous building materials here in Barbados, but we have a Caribbean family that we can pull from. And then we have social inclusion, spaces and policies that promote diversity and inclusion. In terms of resilient and adaptable community design, there's options for we to mitigate flooding concerns with raised buildings, rainwater harvesting, and hurricane-resistant material construction. That's in terms of climate adaptation. Resource management, we like to see sustainable water and energy systems. We are on track with the PV and solar panel installations. And then we want to see flexible infrastructure with multiple purpose buildings or modular homes that can adapt to community needs. And we want to promote healthy communities where we want to see active living with walkable communities and bike lanes that encourage physical activity. Public health, the importance of reducing pollution and having clean air. So we want to minimize the motor vehicle throughout the community. And community well-being, the need for social spaces, mental health resources, and safe public areas. So with all that, we have identified some case studies to say that Barbados have actually started implementing some of these strategies. And this was done by some of my colleagues, Architects Cube, Linda and Shauna. This is Vespera Gardens, people know it as Lancaster, where we would have seen government having a very unique strategy of offsetting costs for affordable homes by owning the rooftops for solar panels or PV panels for a duration of time and then hand it over. This is a commendable initiative. Then we see 6 Roads, another development. This was done by my company and my mentor, past president, Dr. Yolanda Allen. We did this a couple decades ago. This is 6 Roads development. People know it as Emerald Park 1 and 2. But what people didn't know that when we designed this was converting campgrounds to what you see now. there was the sensitivity, and I give Yolanda credit for it, of having a commercial strip, which kind of feed into an already existing commercial corridor. So although it might not be ideal in terms of when you establish the walking distance from the, say, southwest to that strip, it was some level of conscious planning that was already ensuring some 2 decades ago. And is now a vibrant community with an extended commercial complement. Then we have Villages at Cobley, which is a model community in terms of inclusivity, where we have more or less a civic center, if you want to call it that, where you have almost any service that you want to access, from play park, pavilion, you have a gym, you have actually a clinic, you have all food options. So it's a real lifestyle, and it's really pedestrianized because they're congregated parking for guests in these areas, and it's centralized, and it allows for expansion. Then there's another project that my company was involved with. A same developer is Cobley, where the design started with National Housing, and we relooked at it and we did some changes. So what we did is organized planning, where we saw the importance of not letting it become slummy, with giving people the option of putting any prototypical design where they want to. So that's something you have to be sensitive. You don't want to necessarily look across at a mirror image of your house across the street. So we were mindful of that. There was a limited open space area, but the developers were sensitive enough to say, let's empower the habitants of this community by having the kiosks for a variety of uses, barbershop, hairdressing, vendors, etc., as part of the open offerings and communal offers. And this is part of an older community, so the extension, and is relatively not a lot of lots. Then we see London-born towers by my colleague Morris Clark, where we see a hybrid of residence and retail, going back to the old times, and rekindling the urban design of the city. And this one is commendable in terms of the community offerings it has: play park, hairdresser, barber salon, all these things it has. And it was the start of going up in terms of being conscious of our limited land mass. And then he went even further, Maurice Clark again, with the Valerie Housing Estate, where he went to 6 stories for affordable housing solutions. So these are some of the aspects of sustainable planning that we are trying to incorporate on a larger and more organized, comprehensive scale. And I would like to say, in terms of going forward, future planning and recommendations, that we need some policy changes. We need updates to zoning to promote mandates for sustainable and socially inclusive communities. Updates on building codes to encourage affordable options for making affordable housing structures more resilient, more incentives for green building as well. We need innovative funding models, more public-private partnerships, and more tax incentives for private developers for affordable housing projects, like the Hope project at Lancaster. Community engagement, we need to innovate more ways to engage public input and feedback in effective planning. We need to go outside the 25 to 60 age bracket for solicitation for ideas. The 18-year-olds have a voice too. So too do my mom, and she's outside that bracket. So in summary, I would like to say that we need sustainable, resilient, and inclusive planning. Those are the themes. Call to action: we like to encourage planners, policymakers, and community leaders to collaborate on creating complete communities. And closing thought, the planner's role is to encompass these three themes in shaping the future of housing communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Best, for that very comprehensive context for the whole notion of complete communities. Took a little longer than we had thought, but we got there, and it is really important that we understand the international context and understand the things that are driving us towards this particular direction as jurisdictions change and how they build and how they design communities and what can the planners do. And for many decades, we have built communities where we sleep one place and then we go somewhere else to live and to recreate and to work and do everything else. So I want to hear now, we would like to hear now from Paula Smith, who was going to be our first speaker, but actually it's probably a good thing because Paula's going to bring it home to Barbados, as Albert did as well. But I think she's going to look now at some of the bit that we really need to know. What are the policies and strategies that encourage us or direct us towards what we consider to be complete communities? So Paula, if you can share with us your views, we would appreciate it. Thank you very much and welcome again. I introduced you earlier for those who were not here, and welcome.
You're muted, Paula.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Great, sorry. Thank you, Yolanda, and my apologies for the technical hitch up earlier. Following on from Albert's presentation, we know that Barbados is poised to redefine its approach to settlement patterns, community design, and housing solutions to meet the evolving needs of our diverse population. The Barbados Physical Development Plan 2023, also known as the PDP, is a comprehensive policy document that aims to create sustainable, inclusive, and resilient neighbourhoods that enhance the island's natural beauty and foster a high quality of life for the next 10 years. In the context of our theme today, one of the overarching goals of the PDP is building healthy communities. The key concepts here are sustainable infrastructure, integrated land use, and community engagement. The principles of sustainable infrastructure policies include resource efficiency and resilience, renewable energy, and promoting the integration of solar, wind, and other renewable energy sources. We have a really good example with the Barbados Light and Power 10 megawatt utility scale farm at Trents. Also, water management is vital, and by implementing advanced systems for water conservation and management, we can ensure a sustainable supply. We also need to seriously consider green building practices in construction, such as the use of eco-friendly materials and energy-efficient designs. Integrated land use principles include multifunctionality, connectivity, and sustainability. The plan advocates for a balanced approach to land use that supports economic growth while preserving natural resources. Combining residential, commercial, and recreational spaces to create vibrant, walkable communities and the development of efficient public transport systems to reduce traffic congestion and lower carbon emissions is a must. One of the key strategies is mixed-use development, and Highway 7 is a good example of one of our major mixed-use areas. The designation applies primarily within centres and along mixed-use corridors, and these areas have a medium to high-density housing. The policies of the PDP also encourage residential units above commercial uses. A significant aspect of the PDP is to focus on evolving communities in the planning process. And we can do that through promoting awareness about sustainable practices and also the benefits of the PDP to foster community support and participation. Section 2.1 of the PDP deals with promoting sustainable development, and the key strategic policies in this section are managing population growth, communities and housing, and social and community facilities. Planning for future population and settlement in Barbados over the next 10 years will require an enhanced focus on sustainable and resilient development. The growth management framework supports this by identifying 5 distinct areas across the island. These are community cores, the urban corridor, sustainable suburban areas, rural working landscapes, and the Barbados National Park. The community cores are the central areas within the communities that provide the highest level of service and amenities, and they include the National Centre of Bridgetown, the regional centres of Speightstown, Holtown, Oistins, Six Crossroads, Warrens, Wildy, and Bellplain, and also local centres such as Eagle Hall, Hastings, Rockley, Worthing, and Coverley, to name a few. Community cores are intended to be at the heart of the communities, offering daily amenities, heritage assets, and infrastructure. The focus is on reinvestment in the historic cores and re-urbanisation and infill in the emerging cores. Plot coverage for housing development is up to 50% with a plot ratio of 2 to 5, which is equivalent to about 3 to 10 stories. The density target for major development in existing cores will generally be built at existing densities. And in Bridgetown, the target is 30 or more units per net hectare. The urban corridor is a designated area where the greatest concentration of population, jobs, infrastructure, and development exists. The boundary runs west and south from Checker Hall to Ragged Point and extends inland with contiguous development. This area is the primary focus for new development and growth, reflecting the settlement patterns and ensuring efficient use of resources and infrastructure. Predominantly residential areas are located within the urban corridor and are intended to develop as compact and complete communities. The plot coverage for housing development in this area depends on the characteristic of the site. It's up to 50% with a plot ratio of 0.5 to 2, which is equivalent to 1 to 4 stories. The density target for major development is 25 units per hectare. Stable suburban areas are established residential neighbourhoods that are largely built out. They include the St. George Valley, places like Hilbury, National Park villages, and non-contiguous development across the island. The focus in these areas is on infill development or the completion of existing neighbourhoods, with an emphasis on introducing more locally based amenities and mobility options. The plot coverage for housing development in these areas is up to 40%, and the density target for major development is 20 units per net hectare. The rural working landscapes are predominantly areas characterized by agricultural activities, natural resources, and small settlements. These landscapes are intended to remain stable, supporting food production and agriculture. Applications for limited infilling and minor extensions to existing settlements may be permitted in these areas. The Barbados National Park comprises the Scotland District and North East coastline, a protected area that encompasses distinct ecosystems, agricultural lands, and rural settlements. The national park is conserved for its unique and environmental characteristics and serves as an area for conservation and sustainable use of natural resources. The concepts of complete and healthy communities are integral to promoting sustainable and inclusive development. Complete communities are designed to provide residents with convenient access to a full range of housing, amenities, and services within their local areas. The PDP includes comprehensive policies for social and community facilities aimed at enhancing the quality of life for residents. Healthy communities in the context of the PDP policies is one that promotes the well-being of the residents through various strategic strategies. The key elements of this healthy community includes mixed-use development, incorporating residential, commercial, and recreational spaces to create vibrant, walkable neighborhoods, and encouraging seniors housing in centres and mixed-use corridors close to amenities and services. Accessibility is crucial in ensuring that the essential services such as schools, healthcare, shopping, and public transportation are easy to get to. Diverse housing options, offering a variety of housing types to accommodate different income levels and family sizes, and planning for a provision of adequate affordable housing over the next 10 to 30 years. Public spaces include parks, community centres, and other public spaces that encourage interaction and community engagement. Active transport policies promote the development of pedestrian-friendly pathways, cycling lanes, and safe crossings to encourage walking and cycling. This reduces reliance on cars, lowers emissions, and promotes physical health. The picture that's shown here is Warren, so I guess that's not really a very good example of what we're trying to achieve. Green spaces such as Queen's Park, Walker's Reserve, provide recreational and environmental benefits. These spaces offer residents opportunities for recreation, relaxation, and social interaction, while also supporting biodiversity and improving air quality. Health services encompass medical facilities and services that support the physical and mental well-being of the community. The policies of the PDP ensure that healthcare facilities are strategically located to be accessible to all residents. This includes the development of new health centres and the enhancement of existing ones to provide comprehensive medical care and support services. Environmental quality. These policies incorporate measures to improve air quality, such as reducing pollution, managing waste effectively, and protecting natural resources. This includes initiatives to enhance air and water quality and manage stormwater. By focusing on these elements in the PDP aims to create communities that are not only sustainable, but also conducive to the health and well-being of all residents. Part B of the Physical Development Plan contains the 9 community plans for Bridgetown, Speightstown, Holetown, Oyston, 6 Crossroads, Warrens, Wildy, Belle Plaine, and Bathsheba. These plans focus on the detailed policies for land use, development, and infrastructure across the island. Specific strategies are included for various areas and sectors such as transportation, housing, environmental conservation, and economic development. Transit-oriented development encourages clustering housing, jobs, and amenities around public transport hubs to reduce car dependency and promote walkable, livable neighbourhoods. The compact mixed-use communities encourage integrated diverse land uses, housing types, and green spaces that cater to a range of needs and lifestyles. The circular economy focuses on reducing waste by reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and recycling existing materials and products. Ecotourism can generate revenue while preserving natural habitats and wildlife, and through developing financial instruments such as green bonds and sustainability-linked loans, projects can be funded that have a positive environmental impact and attract investors interested in supporting sustainable development. Collaborations between government, businesses, and non-profits can drive innovation and investment in sustainable projects. These partnerships can leverage resources and experts to implement large-scale environmental conservation and economic development initiatives. Through developing creative financial mechanisms and incentives, we can support affordable housing initiatives. And by exploring innovative land use strategies and densification, we can maximize available space. Fostering continuous dialogue and collaboration with residents to address their evolving needs is also a critical consideration. In order to address some of the key challenges such as financial constraints, land scarcity, and improve stakeholder engagement, we need to leverage public-private partnerships. By embracing this comprehensive plan, Barbados can transform its settlement patterns, housing landscape, and community design to create a more equitable, resilient, and livable future for all its citizens. The next step is to translate these ideas into tangible actions through capacity building, concerted public-private collaboration, and of course, community engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. I think when we combine those two presentations, we have quite a lot to consider with respect to complete communities. The physical development plan certainly sets out some clear strategies on the direction for the country as it goes forward in terms of making sure that the spaces are walkable and communities have close access to things that they need. I'd like to, and I would like to say that I was going to engage one or two questions after each speaker, but in the interest of time, I'm going to push on with the presentations, and then we will have a discussion with all the presenters. And I invite you to use the chat, and I want to acknowledge the fact that some of you are also already doing so. Steve has commented from the UK that complete communities are also very topical there, where they're about to dealing with a housing crisis and a requirement to build 1.5 million houses over the next 5 years. And I want to acknowledge Barney's comment that it is good to see that there's importance on outdoor recreational spaces and pedestrianization of complete communities. So form your questions and put them in the chat, and we will have a discussion after. We talk about integrated land use and having commercial enterprise and services on the lower levels and housing on the top, or as part of a combined integrated space. But the challenge is who manages and how do we manage those common spaces? If we have a cycle track or a bike track or a walking track integrating into a community around it or somewhere in the middle, who manages those spaces? And so Michelle Strawn, our next speaker, is going to tell us a little bit about how that can be done and what kind of tools and mechanisms are available as our next presenter. Michelle is a highly experienced facilities management professional with over 15 years of expertise in overseeing and optimizing the operations of multi-million-dollar residential communities. Currently managing 5 upscale residential properties, she excels in creating safe, efficient, and inviting environments for residents, while ensuring compliance with industry standards and sustainability practices. Michelle's extensive background includes prior management of multi-story office buildings and shopping malls, where she developed a keen eye for improving operational efficiencies and enhancing tenant satisfaction. She is known for implementing innovative solutions that streamline processes, reduce costs, and elevate service quality across diverse facilities, and welcomes the use of technology to augment this. With a strong foundation in building maintenance, vendor management, and tenant relations, Michelle leverages cutting-edge technology and best practice to deliver exceptional results. A strategic thinker and collaborative leader, She is committed to fostering a culture of excellence and continuous improvement in all aspects of facilities management. Outside of work, Michelle is passionate about community involvement and enjoys mentoring aspiring facilities management professionals, sharing insights, and advocating for the importance of sustainable facility practices. Michelle, we welcome you to World Town Planning Day webinar, and we invite you now to share your views on how do we manage these common spaces when we talk about complete communities and having easy access to the services that we need as part of our community. Michelle?
Thank you, Dr. Arlene. Good afternoon, everyone. I will try to be as brief as possible in discussing this topic of managing common areas or managing the commons. Albert and Paula would have comprehensively discussed the development plan and the idea that we have for bringing Barbados forward in terms of complete communities. But how do you maintain and manage those communities? And I think that actually starts in the design phase, because maintenance and management is something that needs to be ventilated during the design phase. We have all in our varied careers and different capacities encountered something that was built and it looks really nice, but nobody gave thought to how do we clean this? You know, how do we have a preventative maintenance schedule to ensure that we can service it? You know, we've got these great big buildings and they look lovely, but maybe the door size doesn't accommodate the specific kind of machinery that you need to get in to industrially clean the floors, or get in, there's not enough access to the duct work. So I do think that property managers, facilities managers need to be consulted and involved in the design phase so that we can future plan these complete communities. We can make sure that they are sustainable and that they are resilient and that they're inclusive. I know we would have recently heard our Prime Minister making amendments to the Disabilities Act. You know, that's important. You need to be able to ensure that this community that you have is equitable and fair for everybody, and not just the able-bodied, not just those who are blessed with sight. You know, are they able to navigate these communities when living there? You know, we need to ensure that there is good governance for these communities. Is it well run? Do you have good representation? Is there excellent leadership? Is it inclusive in terms of the social and cultural aspects of the community? Are you catering for diverse religions in your complete community? You know, how is your housing and built environment laid out? In your housing designs, do you make accommodations for Muslims who need to be able to wash their feet when they come through the door? Those are things that increase the equitable distribution of the housing plan, and it avoids, you know, communities bottlenecking themselves because they think that, well, the only place they can be understood is in this little clique. You want to be able to have it so that the community is sustainable. When you have your services, public services, you know, we always think about the buses, but there are other public services that you want to be able to access in your community. I think, as Yolanda said earlier, we all live somewhere and then we get up and we go to work elsewhere. But what if you could live in a community where you could work? What if you had the opportunity to be able to walk to work, drop your child off at school or daycare, head to your quote unquote office or to a green space and have a meeting in your complete community? Would you be able to ensure that your computer is meeting the needs of not just your present generation, but without compromising future generations? You know, are you going to be able to withstand, and recover from challenges like climate change? Have you ensured that when you built your community, all of the buildings are rated to category 3 or above? Have you ensured that you are able to diversify your economic community in that community, so that if there is a downturn, if there is an issue where you have COVID again and persons have to wait and work from home, are they able to sustain themselves? Do they have a space where they can grow their own food? Or are you going to be finding persons bottlenecking at the supermarket because, you know, nobody has a backyard garden anymore? Do you have equal access and opportunities for all your community members, regardless of background or identity? This is very important when you're talking about complete communities. And the reason that is important is because your common areas, they cement the community, and they cement the sustainability, because when you have your public parks and your recreational spaces, Coverley has introduced a dog park, so people can walk their dogs through the community to the dog park. There's an area you can let your dog off the leash. There's a social element there because all the homeowners are chatting with each other while the dogs are sniffing each other. So you need to ensure that your green spaces and your community centers are inclusive, and they give you a social cohesion and mobility for your complete community. And how do you manage that? I mean, I'm a big proponent of software, but software has to be managed, populated, monitored by a human element. So in these complete communities, you need to ensure that the residents have a sense of ownership, and they understand that their volunteerism in these communities with the bike racks and the EV charging stations and these solar powered lights and water recycling and eco-friendly materials, they have to have a sense of ownership behind that, so that they are ensuring that they're not being abused and that they're not being vandalized. And years ago in the Barbadian community, you always heard, you know, it's a village, because a lot of families lived closely. So there were multiple homes with families in them, and everybody looked out for the children. Everybody made sure that, you know, their neighbor's house was good. You know, if they saw something smoking, they can run outside and throw some water on it. And that sense of community and ownership is important, because when you volunteer, or if you are fortunate enough to live in a community that has actually set aside a budget for that type of management of the common facilities and in common areas, you have to make sure that you are inputting the information into the software, so that you know when your social center has been booked for a game of dominoes. So you know that, well, Monday evenings, the Domino Society is there. So you know that you can't come and say, well, I want to play drafts. I train to be the next Suki King. You have to understand that the software is important. So when you put in to register for that day, you also have the option of, hey, I noticed that a street light is out and it's been out for a while, and that stretch of road is quite dark for persons biking or walking. You can actually log that in your software, and that goes, you know, to the management of the common area, and they're able to assess and have it rectified. So that's important. When you look at disaster preparedness and making sure that the common areas are designed, not just because more often than not, everybody tends to, oh, I have hurricane straps on my house, or I know that the closest hurricane shelter is, you know, the school down the road. But is it really a safe space during that emergency? Most of those schools, have they been retrofitted so they have backup power? Do they have water tanks? Is there a space to grow food? Suppose it is more than a category 2, and the devastation is more widespread, and you need to be housed in that area? Is your common area resilient enough that you are able to thrive while being displaced? Does it include the way it was designed? Does that include it being resilient to flooding? How hot is it? Most schools in the auditoriums and so on don't have that heat reducing plant. They now need to be retrofitted with ACs. And then you have the knock-on effect of what does the electricity bill look like? So you need to be able to make sure that the common area can adapt to the climate change, and that the persons who are coming to use these common areas as their safe havens during their emergencies are able to or have been trained in basic disaster preparedness and first aid, so that you are fostering that sense of community. I do not know of very many neighborhoods that have built resilient infrastructure into their design, but I know that that is something that is at the forefront of a lot of town planners' minds, because it's important. It is critical, really, to be able to get where you need to be and to make sure that your common areas are inclusive. I know Albert would have touched on Vesper Gardens and the villages at Coverley and London Bourne Towers. Those are important because the home owners or the residents need some place to go that's inclusive for them. And they need to feel comfortable that everybody from different generations, seniors, people with disabilities, persons from different economic backgrounds, they should be able to come together in these common areas and these spaces and enjoy it. You know, they should be safe and welcoming for all cultures and backgrounds. You need to ensure that the individuals who are tasked with managing these common areas are trained to be able to not just, you don't just need a security officer sitting down looking at a bank of cameras. They need to be trained to be able to look for things. They have to be tasked with being able to engage their community when they have to interact with these homeowners. You know, you don't just want to have somebody who's not involving the residents in the decision making about the use and development of their common spaces. So you will see things popping up, being advertised, oh, come to this karaoke night, or we're having a paint and sip. These are areas. Sorry. Georgina, I'm just going to mute you, please, if that's okay. Sorry, you have you see these community events being advertised, and that is deliberate because you need to have community engagement. And this is also important in terms of managing your common areas, because it gives you an idea of the kind of demand for your common spaces. You may get more response for a karaoke night than you might a canasta. One of the communities that I manage has a slightly older demographic, and they have a canasta league. So that kind of engagement is very important. The difficulties, obviously, when it comes to managing these common areas are the bottom line always, what's the cost? You know, how do I balance the upkeep with a limited budget? And again, that has to do a lot with monitoring the use of your space, because your budget for the next year should definitely have the figures from the previous year. So you know if your community space has been used 10 times in a month, and you know that each time it's been used, you have to ensure that it's been cleaned, and that means that the utilities have been used. All of that maintenance cost needs to tie into your limited budget. You need to make sure that there's no conflict of interest and that it's inclusive. I can't stress enough how important inclusivity is, because you need to be able to give all the different community groups, you know, different priorities and different access. You need to ensure that different religious groups and religious practices can be observed in private. We touched on the cameras earlier, so things like vandalism and safety concerns, that is vital to ensure that they're safe and well maintained. You will have different communities, like 15 years ago when Coverley, or maybe it's longer than that now, but years ago when the villages at Coverley was first introduced, you know, all the Barbadians are like, what? Those houses too small. I can't understand it. And now they're about to launch phase 2 residences at Coverley with another town square, because the demand for that type of living is so huge. You know, they launch Monday and they're sold out by the end of the month. That type of living, of being able to walk to the supermarket, the gas station, the doctor's office, the idea that you can have different generations living in one village, just a couple doors down. You know, it harkens back to years ago with the Barbadian village and being able to live closely with everybody. So it can be a challenge having those different, because, you know, Gran may prefer to be up early. So she's up at the crack of dawn, but then by 6 p.m. she's asleep, you know, or she's, as soon as the news finish, you know, lights out. But then the younger persons in that community, 7 o'clock, they're ready to go. It's karaoke. It's time for it's Friday. Let's go have a drink. Let's go play pool. So you do have those challenges when it comes to managing common areas, but they aren't insurmountable. And it is something that needs to be ventilated more. It needs to be considered as a way to improve on your investment, because should you need to transition out of that housing and not necessarily, you may continue to own it, but you may want to rent it. You know, a tenant will love the idea of a complete community and that their common areas are managed and that it's inclusive and it's monitored and they can get all the things that they need out of their home. So then that comes into best practices. How do you collaborate between, you know, the local government and residents and public and private sector? You need to vocalize that this is not just for, you know, the high-end gated communities. It is also possible for more affordable housing. It is possible that you can condition the thinking of persons when they are looking to buy or build. It doesn't necessarily just have to be, you know, my own little kingdom with just my one house. Look into a complete community, look into resident-driven initiatives where you get the residents to have ownership in the upkeep of their spaces. Look into things like, we touched on the solar lighting before and the cameras, but what about smart lighting? You know, the lighting that it senses as you walk up and it gets brighter as you're in its vicinity, and then it dims as you go out of the orbit. Not only is that much better for you, the resident, but it also helps from a maintenance perspective because there's usually less electricity all the time because it's on a dimmer light. If there are no human movements around, because you don't want that brightening for every cat or dog that runs by. You want to be able to have the app-based maintenance requests in real time, because if you notice the burst pipe on Monday at 9 a.m. and you log that request and that immediately goes to the maintenance personnel and they are able to action that, think of all the water that you're saving. Think of all the cost that you're saving. If you suddenly taken an interest in a different kind of game or a different kind of social community event, and you wanted to be able to reach out to the rest of your community and ask, are y'all interested? You know, digital community boards are very, very important. They really help with that. And we've got so much technology at our fingertips that is very easy nowadays to be able to create an email blast. You know, you've got SurveyMonkey, you've got all those different types of communications that you can use and you get people involved, you get the communities, you get the residents driving the initiative. So I know that Albert would have touched on the green technology, and we've all been knocked over our heads with the idea of a solar panel farms and so on. But green technology, urban agriculture, collaborative housing, these are the future of complete communities. You want to have more residents associations, and persons need to be educated on what a residents association is and how it can involve the residents, and what it means for the community going forward. Because you want to be able to reimagine your own community with these types of ideas in mind, so that you can help manage your commons. If you want to be sure of the success of your complete community, you need to think about the importance of sustainable, resilient, inclusive common areas that are managed competently. You need to be mindful of the idea of not just building a community and leaving it there. I know there are, if you drive up towards St. Patrick's and you're heading towards Roundabout and you look to the right, there's Lowthers. So when Lowthers was first built, you know, they had this green space. But if you take a drive through Lowthers, you will realize that sometimes the grass on that green space is almost, 2 feet tall, because nobody's cut it. Because there has not been a comprehensive plan of how do we manage this. Do we incorporate a residents association? Do we, even something as simple as a neighborhood watch? Your neighborhood watch can also be the one that monitors your commons and what is required. Those are the people who have a WhatsApp group and they say, hey, the layout is out by the post office, because they have similar to Coverley's concept, Lowthers has centralized mailbox system. So everybody comes to one area to pick up their mail in their numbered mailboxes. So those are things that we need to look at and think about. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you so much. That was very insightful, helping us to think about how you build community and the many ways in which we can build in the design the cost of those common areas that we talk about. And as we know, common areas in terms of the traditional village or the traditional little shop used to kind of evolve. Now we're trying to build it in upfront, because the settlement areas and the solutions that we're coming up with are more designed, as opposed to just evolving as we get access to land as cut up from a plantation. So thank you for those thoughts. We will come back with questions on it and comments on it as we come to our last presenter, Mr. Jonathan Platt, who is an associate member of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors for over 20 years, with over 20 years of experience in the building industry. Most of his experience was established in the UK as a senior technical officer, environmental health, and a senior building control officer, building inspector for local government departments. Since 2004, he has been employed with the Barbados National Standards Institute as a technical officer under the engineering and building component section. Jonathan studied in the UK and obtained a TEC certificate in building studies, construction technology, and certificate in environmental health studies between 1978 and 1983. As a building senior inspector and associate member of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors and a technical officer for the BNSI, he has been exposed to numerous types of properties and construction methods, problems, and solutions over the years. He has assisted in helping clients to comply with building codes, as well as playing the role as the author of building codes and construction standards. And this has put him in a unique position to provide advice. Jonathan's concern has always been for the future occupants of the buildings to get it right the first time where possible. with regards to your construction methods, as those that are impacted positively or negatively could be your family members. So we would like to welcome Jonathan to talk to us a little bit about resilience with respect to construction practices in our communities. Jonathan?
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm sure that most of you here are sitting comfortably, probably very hungry, because it is lunchtime unless you had your lunch by your screen. So hopefully we can go through this in a practical way and as quickly as possible. Now, I'd like to thank the Barbados Town and Planning Society for inviting BNSI at this event, this World Town Planning Day 2024, under the theme Complete Communities, Reimagining Settlement Communities and Housing Solutions. Now, I just want to touch on housing solutions. And Dr. Bess and a number of you have mentioned about sustainability. Now, sustainability, resilience, those are two key words that we hear so much, but we want to really put them down to some small bites. And we know that small bites that can have future impact or great future impact. And we're going to be discussing this subject here of the Code of Practice for the Construction of Houses, CRCP 10. Maybe most of you have not heard of it, but we're going to see how this small bite can have a future impact of a great nature. Now, on a personal note, I must say that this Code of Practice is one that I've been discussing with Dr. Greenwich of SEDEMA for a number of years. In actual fact, it's a revision of an existing code, which I used to call the student manual, which really it was. And it was a Code of Practice for construction of houses and instruction manual for foremen and experienced artisan. And it was called Part 2 Student Manual. So it's a revision of that. So how did this Code of Practice come about? Just briefly tell you. Now, this Code of Practice came about by a submission from SEDEMA as a new work item proposal. Now, I know some of you architects may understand what that means. In order for anything to be of a regional nature, it must first come to the Barbados National Standards, who will propose that as a regional development. Now, the interesting thing, just as a national standard is developed, it's a similar thing with regards to a regional. For a national standard to be developed, all the members or the stakeholders that have an interest would have their fingers in the pie with regards to that standard being developed. In the same nature, that's what happens with a regional. So all the member states in the region would have their fingers in this pie with regards to the construction of houses, the CRCP 10. And we're going to see why that's so important, that everybody in a sense has signed off on this standard, have agreed the methods in this standard that can resolve a particular problem. And this is what we're going to see. Remember, we're talking about construction of houses and we're talking about resilience. So we're going to look at a few interesting points. Why is the development or revision of the code so important? Why? Why are we having it? Why are we here? We're going to look at the economic cost of disasters in the Caribbean. We're going to look at three areas, for example, the economic impact. We're going to have a little review on that. And then we're going to remind ourselves of some of the major disasters that's really impacted our region. And then we're going to look at the human cost. So we're going to go down to grassroots. We're going to see how it impacts us personally, our family members, our cousins, our uncles, and our families abroad within the region. So for example, as we mentioned, I'll just highlight this for you. We have an overview of the substantial economic costs of disasters in the Caribbean and the importance of developing and adhering to building codes to mitigate these costs. So, the economic impact overview. Let's have a look at what we're talking about here. Now, imagine this. The total economic cost of disasters in the Caribbean exceeded 28 billion over the last 7 decades. And that's between the periods of 1950 and 2016. The costs surpassed 20 billion. Now, can any of you pull your pockets with 20 million? We know it's a devastating amount of money with regards to the losses here in the Caribbean. So let's have a look at, let's remind ourselves of some of the disasters that's impacted our region. Now, I'm going to highlight this for you because I really want us all to appreciate what we've been through. Can you see that clearly? I know you can't answer right now because you're all on mute. But the point is here, we've seen Hurricane Maria in 2017, 1.3 billion in damages and losses in Dominica alone. Hurricane Dorian in 2019, 3.2 billion in damages and losses in Bahamas. In La Soufrière eruption, and you remember this, in 2021, 233 million in damages and losses in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And then we came to the earthquake in Haiti, and we remember that so distinctly. 1.6 billion in damages and losses, and with more than 137,000 buildings damaged and destroyed. Now, we've talked about these things for years, and we've talked about how we're going to manage this, how we're going to mitigate, how we're going to ensure that there's resilience in our housing. We've talked about this, but now we've come to a solution, not the solution, but a solution that can help us. But before we do so, let's have a look at the human cost of disaster. Now, this I'm going to try and keep this as succinct and as short as possible. And maybe you'd have some questions after that, hopefully you'd ask me. But let's have a taste or a look at the human cost. Over 25,000 people were killed in disasters in the Caribbean between that region I told you, between 1950 and 2022. In Haiti alone, in 2021, 2,246 deaths. Deaths, your friends, your family, your members, your cousins. 12,000, over 12,000 were injured. Over 329, we just can't find them. They're missing persons. And over 660,000 have been affected, have been impacted by these disasters.
I sent it. Have you got yours?
Oh, please mute yourself, please. I would appreciate that. Thank you. All right. Now, just project those figures to us locally. In Barbados, a population of 280,000 since July the 1st, 2024. Now, if this impacted Barbados, we would only have a population of 32,000. We would not be able to cope. Now we're going to look now at the damage of our housing sector. Let's take a look for a little moment. So the damage in the housing sector. Just like to highlight this for you so you can see clearly. A significant portion, as mentioned here, of disaster damage in the Caribbean is the housing sector, and I'm sure you all agree with that. And this possibly is a reason why the inconsistent application of building codes and the possible weak legislation have contributed to the extensive damage that we're seeing around in our region. How often, right now we had Beryl just skirted our coast and damaged the fisheries. Now, what if it didn't? How many roofs would have been blown off in our region? How many lives could have been lost? Are we a knee-jerk country, or are we going to put something in place to mitigate these things from happening? So we're now going to touch upon the informal construction sector, because this may be where some of the issues could be resolved. Now, we've all seen this kind of construction. We've seen this kind of construction so many times. But many, as mentioned here, many houses built through the informal construction sector do not adhere to the formal building codes and standards. We know what this is. I mean, many persons, yes, they go and borrow money from the financial institution, and then they look for ways to make that money last as much as it possibly can. In other words, they look through their relatives, their friends, and said, look, I know somebody that can build. Here's a friend of mine, he did it quite well for me. But you do not know his method of construction. You do not know if hereditarily he has been building wrong all the time. But it looks good. But the latent defect is still there. Has he tied down the roof? Has he put the steel in after he's built the blocks? You do not know. And these are facts. These are things that can have a serious impact on the resilience and sustainability of your property. So a lack of formal skill training and certification among these practitioners is a concern in this informal building sector. Hence, the birth of this standard. The revision of that student manual that I mentioned to you is entitled CRCP 10. Oops, sorry, jumped a slide. All right, CRCP 10. Now, this standard, as mentioned before, was introduced as a regional standard to be developed, and it came from SEDEMA. I developed and promoted. This was called the Practice of Comprehensive Disaster Management, so let's abbreviate it as CDM. Now, as an innovative concept for reducing the risk and loss associated with natural and technological hazards and the effects of climate change to enhance the region's sustainable development. Now we're talking about houses being sustainable. Now this was with a partnership, as seen here, I'll just show you. A partnership between SEDEMA and CrossQ. Now, if you've not heard of CrossQ before, I'm sure most of you have. It's CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality. Now, under the project of the support of advanced comprehensive management, this has given birth to this standard. Now, we're going to touch a little bit more about the comprehensive disaster management and CrossQ. Now, as I mentioned before, CrossQ is really the secretariat that would ensure the harmonization of a standard throughout its member states. Now, remember I mentioned before that all the members have their fingers in this pie. So in other words, all of them have their fingers and have had massaged this standard and all come to a harmonious consensus and have agreed that this is the standard that would work in the region. So this comprehensive disaster management, what is it all about? Let's just touch upon this slightly. Now, SEDEMA and its role is to promote the engineering of this comprehensive disaster management across its 90 member states. And CrossQ, well, what's its role? Is the development the regional standards and advancing the goal of safer, more resilient, and sustainable houses. And that's what we want in the region. Now, remember that this was established back in 1973. The CARICOM community is a grouping of 20 countries, 15 member states, and 5 associated members, most of which are small island developing states. So you can imagine if this standard is now going to be implemented all in those regions. We're going to see, yes, a small bite, but with a great impact. So how is it going to be impactful? Where are we going to start? Well, here's the clue. The CARICOM vocational qualification is where it's going to drill down in some respects. Again, so introducing the CVQ, the competency-based occupational regional qualification, is where the key is the answer. The purpose is to certify individuals, allowing free movement of these trained artisans, all these workers, so that they can move about freely in the economy. So the role of construction, well, is to support the implementation of safe building practices through formal certification by using the CVQ. Now, I must bear in mind that this CVQ is based on the Code of Practice. it's elements in that code of practice that's being used to train these artisans, these professionals that will be able to trade their trade in such a way that we know they're complying to a code of practice. They're being trained in this code of practice. Now, the development of this CVQ is important too. And just highlight it for you again now. This was in partnership by SEDIMA, in partnership with the CARICOM Association of National Training Agencies. Now this CANTA for abbreviation. Now, their focus was the building consensus. Actually, I got this. Yeah, so this was in the building construction and site supervision level 3 for these ones that's going to be trained. Approval was given by the Council for Human and Social Development, so they have approval. Now, CANTA was created to establish and govern a regional training and certification system. Now, this harmonized with something very familiar to us. It harmonizes with our national TVEC system and develop regional standards in training and establish a system for assessment, certification, and the recognition of those artisan skills. So yes, these ones are being trained, they're being harnessed in order to comply with this CRCP 10. I told you I was going to be quite quick and concise. So this is my conclusion. And simply to say this, the critical need for robust building codes like CRCP 10 is obvious. And really, I'd like to acknowledge the efforts of SEDIMA, CrossQ, and other partners in promoting a safer and more resilient housing in the Caribbean. But before I say thank you, before I end, there's something else that hopefully you'll have some questions on. Even though ones are being trained, doesn't mean they're going to do it right. So there needs to be, and sometimes ones would say enforcement, but I would tend to say surveillance, because surveillance is more helping ones to comply rather than saying you've done it wrong, here's the fine. So there needs to be surveillance, there needs to be ones helping them in order to ensure that they comply with the standard. Hence, there's a need for not just quantifying, but to ensure that there is quality. In other words, just to give you an example, most of us, naturally, if we're going to build, we would seek the financial institution. The financial institution will say, yes, you qualify for X amount. So off you go, you buy your land, and then you get your drawings, and you all are planners, so you know what goes next. So hopefully you get everything in place, and then you start to build. And then the financial institution will say something to you. You need to get a quantity surveyor to quantify what materials that you're using so you can get your next tranche of money. But you do not have quality. In other words, you do not have anyone confirming that the work is being done correctly. Could you please mute your mic for me, please? Thank you very much. So you don't have anyone quantifying that the work has been done correctly, only a quantity surveyor. So here's an area that there needs to be closed down. Here's a big gap. So during that process, when you have the financial institution, they could also invoke a building inspector to check that the works are being carried out correctly. So that's just a clue as to what could be done rather than waiting for legislation to actually legislate that inspections need to be done. That's just one area I see that is of need that we could close down. So having said all that, CRCP 10 is there, and it's there to help ones to ensure that there is clear resilience in our building so we can look for the future. Although it's a small bite, it is a sustainable one that could help us in the future to keep our properties in a way that we want them to be, and for the future of our family members and those that would occupy them. So at that note, I thank you, and hopefully you're all going to have a good lunch, and we can have a few questions after. Ain't that right? All right, so thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you so much for that. Really emphasizing the importance of having good construction standards and all that we do. And because we are, as often happens, we are running out of time, but I'm going to ask all the panelists, Paula, Albert, Michelle, to join us as we come into this question time or comment time. And because you have the stage right now, Jonathan, I'm going to address the comment that came in from Rich A. In what ways could container and flat pack housing help address the affordable housing shortages in Barbados? There's one is coming to you, and are there incentives for developers or individuals to use these cost-effective methods? And then the other part of the question is, what specific building codes and zoning regulations apply to container and flat pack homes in Barbados? Are there streamlined processes in place for these alternative housing types, given the urgency of affordable housing? So Jonathan, do you want to address that first, and let's see if anyone else can add to it?
I can address it somewhat. Remember, we don't know what innovation is, in the sense that we don't know what's going to be invented. So there's not necessarily a standard for something that hasn't been invented yet. So let's get that point clear. And basically what the building code will tell you is that once it's compliant with an acceptable standard, internationally acceptable, so it could be ISO, it could be ASTM, it could be British standard, that you're conforming to, then that building component is acceptable in Barbados. So the onus is, if you're bringing something of an innovative nature, then you would have it tested, right? And by an acceptable standard. And once you've done that, then of course it will be accepted in Barbados. So it's not that we would try and think of what is innovation. We don't know what you're going to invent. So have it tested to an acceptable standard, and then that would set out the specifications, as it were, as to how it should be implemented. So
thank you for that. Thank you. And I don't know, Albert or Paula and maybe Andy, is there any to answer the other part of Rich's question? Can it help with the flat pack housing? Can it help with affordable housing shortages in Barbados? Can it help? Are there any incentives for developers to use these cost-effective methods? Is anybody aware?
You're muted, Albert.
Yeah, well, we have been looking at different configurations of using the container housing concept. We actually had one of our architects who his thesis was to look at innovative ways of using containers to develop housing and other building types. And we have been exploring it for a couple of years now, for housing and offices. And we find it's an affordable option, but the reality of it is it comes down to what Jonathan thinks from a building code perspective, because I don't think we have any framework for that.
Okay, so it's yet a process. It's in process. So Rich, if you have any follow-up comments, you can put them in the chat, but we'll move on then to thank you very much, Albert and Jonathan, for those responses. We're going to move on to some earlier comments that came in. One came from Mark C. Kudos to the presenters. Dr. Best, given the high incidence of crime, how do we design or reduce or inhibit crime in our communities? I think that is what he's asking. Any suggestions?
Thanks for that question, Mark. That one is a stomper though. The reality of it is that I have some radical ideas about trying to mitigate or reduce crime, because I think it's a social nuisance and not and so there's a lot of different factors that can contribute to it. But I think there are measures we can put in place to attempt to mitigate it. I think outside of good street lighting, I have this concept, and there's a constant debate here in the office where I believe the demise of the veranda in the front of the house I spoke about this a couple of years ago at a lecture for Town Planning Society. I don't know if you remember. I think the veranda now being turned inward to the courtyard has reduced the surveillance that we had on the street. So now we have to rely on cameras and neighborhood watch when we had it ingrained in our urban design concepts with the veranda on the street with a lookout to the road. So I think criminals in terms of theft are, they're kind of dissuaded when they see high surveillance. So the veranda on the street give that constant surveillance and activity of the corridors, which is the access of the for the prowlers, so to speak. In terms of the violence and stuff like that, I think that has a bigger issue. And I think once we have deal with a lot of these ills, the reduce the mental illness and anxieties and stuff from proper urban design with the inclusivity and stuff like that, there'll be more cohesion socially. And I think that that can help with the other crimes outside the town.
Thank you very much.
Some ideas.
Thank you. I'm going to thank you for that. Mark, if you have anything to follow up, I think you can put that in the chat. Sharia B from the Barbados Today Media House has put something on the table, which I'm taking it up now because Albert was talking about the fact that we have reduced surveillance from the veranda on the outside. And she says that the presenter today spoke about how Barbados's housing solutions evolved from the post-independence period to now. What was not spoken about is how these new housing developments, while modern, have taken away a lot of our cultural heritage and the traditional way of living, the traditional Bajan way of living. In these new developments, residents cannot grow a kitchen garden or plant a breadfruit tree or keep black belly sheep. This is not the Bajan way. Can someone respond to this? So I just raise that because, again, it is about changing how we used to live and how we used to design our homes. Can I get a response from any of you, Albert, Paula, Andy, in terms of changing our culture? Yes.
I actually responded in the chat regarding this because yes, the keeping of the black belly sheep has evolved in the more modern communities away from that. But we definitely have kitchen gardens. We definitely plant indigenous trees. I know Barney Gibbs, they do dwarf trees. You would be very surprised what you can cultivate in a smaller space. And if you're really going to look at this holistically, the estates at St. George, which is a multi-million-dollar project, it's gated, definitely with the condominium type living, they have acres dedicated to fruit forests and to tea gardens, and those are maintained. You know, the residents, they come down and they garden, you know, keep you active and keep your hands in the mud. I'm a little biased because I also manage that community, but it is something that is more prevalent, and you would see a lot more of that kind of inclusivity because people are gravitating towards that kind of living. They're looking for that kind of community. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're, you know, cutting out the Barbadian. I mean, yes, you're not going to find the black belly sheep roaming in the gated communities, but again, this is why we want the idea of a complete community to not just be for the gated communities. Why can't you have a complete community that's not gated and persons communally own sheep? Sheep keep down the grass, goats keep down grass and vines and so on. So it's just us reimagining our communities, as I said in my presentation, and thinking differently.
Yes, thank you for that, Michelle. And I see that Laura M has contributed also to that response in terms of having access to dwarf fruit trees and encouraging them to be grown in urban communities or complete communities. And I find it interesting that you talk about this one solution being the communal livestock rearing, which, as I think when they feature on the blue zones, people who live along a lot of communal spaces, gardening together, rearing livestock together, the things that people do together help them to be healthier in their minds, and it contributes in some
Yes.
way to their longevity. So thank you for that. Sherry, if you have anything else to respond to, you can do it in the chat and we will come back to it. I believe there was an earlier comment from Adrian C. Can the presenters explain how the way development planning is being exercised in Barbados is contributing to sustainable water management and enhancing water quality, other than by including revisions to groundwater zoning? Land conversion has the potential to negatively impact groundwater recharge, for increased stormwater runoff, for example. Allowing developments to proliferate across the landscape without consideration of the capacity of the water distribution system to be able to service these needs will place additional capital investment needs on the Barbados Water Authority, which could be avoided by stricter requirements for targeted developments of existing urban areas where the unit cost of service provision is lower. And I think there's a further bit to that I can't see at the moment. Further, what requirements are being put in place for the proper management of wastewater to prevent potential contamination of groundwater, and incentives for treated water reuse in new developments, increases in areas under development. No regard for the change of uses across the landscape. I'm not sure that is the case, but I don't know. Paula, are you able to respond to that?
Somewhat. Well, from the planning perspective, from the planning department's perspective, we actually look at trying to reduce the hard surface areas within the developments by maintaining a certain amount of uncovered area within the site. So that would allow for the runoff not to be so devastating. We also have included we've also included the Roofs to Reefs project, which looks at comprehensive drainage from when it actually comes out of the sky onto the landscape, and they have a comprehensive way of dealing with the drainage through that project. So there are some things that we are trying to put into place, but the point that was made about having development in areas that don't have the infrastructure, then it does cause a significant problem.
Mm-hmm. And is there in terms of managing wastewater and preventing contamination of groundwater, is that still something under the plan department's portfolio in consultation with any other agency?
To a certain extent, Barbados Water Authority, as was mentioned before, has actually rezoned the areas so that development, the certain areas that development is restricted or they have conditions, and we actually put conditions on to support that. I think it is a very difficult situation to sort of try to harness because of the way that Barbados, the groundwater with Barbados. So the key policy that deals with that would be the water zoning. There are obviously engineering solutions that can be also applied, but generally, yes, we do liaise with Barbados Water Authority and other agencies to try and reduce having the groundwater contaminated.
Yes, I think Environmental Protection Department may also be an agency that assists with the contamination, I think, under their legislation, and possibly too, the stormwater drainage plans that are required by the Ministry of Transport and Works may also be something that they manage in terms of the new developments that I think you're referring to, where they're taking place and converting new lands, agricultural lands into development. Those may be managed by the Barbados Water Authority. So thank you for that, Paula. Adrian, if you have any additional things to comment on, you can, on any feedback on that. If it didn't quite answer what you wanted, you can put it in the chat. Lots of things going on in the chat, but we only have a short time. I have here, thank you, Paula. I have here from G. Clark. Are you up to date? Are up to date town planning guidelines available to developers for their reference so that they may be guided by technical requirements, example for items such as potable, non-potable water, tanks, etc., parking, FAR density requirements early on the applicant's project development process? Are those available? Can anyone say?
We are actually working on those at the moment. The physical development plan gives some guidance relating to those things, but we are working on the plan also expects us to provide proper technical guidance relating to those. I know that we're at the moment working on the potable water requirements, and obviously we have to review the parking standards and various things. But so we haven't got anything that's written that can come out to the public at the moment, but that will happen. But you can discuss those issues with any of the planners at the planning department.
Okay, thank you for that. So if there's anything else that still remains unanswered for you, G. Clark, please follow up with the planning department as Paula has suggested. I'm going to take another one, maybe my final one, because I noticed that we are coming short on time and we do have to finish on time. You can, in the chat, presenters, if you can respond to some of the queries that people have raised. And Julia says, thank you for this session on the topic of training the workforce and best practices and dealing with hurricane preparedness. Does that certification already exist? The certification for construction workers producing the work. I think this is an issue that everyday house owners need to look out for. What is the minimum certification that we could, I don't see the rest of the message, that we could expect? Jonathan, can you address that? Training workforce. Is Jonathan there? Jonathan, you're muted if you're speaking. Anyone else can tell us whether that certification exists? Albert, do you know if it exists already?
This is the certification for the workers, the CBT?
Yes,
Yes, it does.
It does exist. Okay, good. So, and where can you get information on it? Which agency do you need to turn to get information?
You can probably check with the TVET Council.
Okay, TVET Council.
Okay.
Joshua P., where do you see the greatest opportunities for Barbados to make impactful strides in energy efficiency housing with affordability in mind? Anyone has a response to that? As I think I'll take that as my final one. Where do you see the greatest opportunities for Barbados to make impactful strides in energy efficiency housing with affordability in mind? Affordable housing with energy efficiency.
Okay, well, we have the HOPE project at the moment, and I think moving forward, we're going to have to look at more public-private partnerships in order to make the housing affordable. The suggestion of flat packs and containers for housing, I think that's something that we'd probably consider, but as Albert said, we don't have a building code for that. So those are things that we will need to try and develop.
Yes. Okay, thank you. We've had so many comments, many of them I could not get to. We might have to have a part 2 on this discussion. Don't know how feasible that is, but we might look into that. And at this stage, as we come up to our 2 p.m. shut off point, I would like to invite our President Andy Gill to raise the vote of thanks, give a vote of thanks to all those presenters. Thank you, Andy.
Kim Penfold is actually.
Kim is
on
doing it.
call.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kim.
But thank you, Andy. I thought Yolanda let me off the hook. For a moment.
I was
No,
the
Kim,
backup.
not that easy. He didn't update
I
me.
was the backup.
Right. Okay. First of all, I'll get the formal bit of the vote of thanks out of the way to start with, and I'll start with you, Yolanda, for chairing the session, and also for you and the Barbados Town Planning Society team who've organised today's event. I think a great vote of thanks is due to all of you. And then I'm going to thank the speakers. I'll say a few things about them individually in a moment, but I'd like to thank them all for their professional and informative presentations, and particularly thank them for the way that the links between what they had to say came through, which I think was a vital part of the success of today's session. And then thank the audience for the comments and questions that have come in. I hope they all got something out of it. I hope they all got as much out of it as I did, because I found it a very, very useful session indeed. Looking at its content, just a few comments. Andy started off by setting the context, which is basically that we can't go on in the way that we're going on. The development pattern of the last 20 or 30 years is not sustainable in Barbados. And in many ways, what's happened in other parts of the world is not sustainable either. But we're in a particularly dangerous situation because of climate change. And therefore, we need to think very carefully about how we look after our resources and we develop in a sustainable and resilient fashion. So he set that context. And turning to what Paula then went on with after a slight gap, she said that the PDP is redefining its approach. And that's vital to making that change that Andy indicated was necessary. And she said that the PDP is aiming for sustainable, inclusive and resilient neighborhoods with sustainable infrastructure going with it. And that it's necessary to consider how we build, the building materials, green building practices and energy efficiency. She emphasized community engagement, and it's necessary for people to be aware of what we're trying to do, but also to be fully on board with it. So there's a lot to be done in the way of education and talking to people. And Paula also gave some clarity, which I think some of our developer friends would appreciate, in terms of the growth strategy and the density policy going forward. And she made it very clear the PDP is about complete communities, which with all the facilities available to the people living in them. And a comment about Albert's presentation. He looked at the challenges in master planning design for affordable communities, and he looked at an international picture as well as a national picture, but again, locally picked up on resilience and the need for adaptation where necessary, and certainly resilience in any new development. And he stressed the fact that we need to meet all community needs through a complete communities approach. And one thing which I will pick up from his talk, and it came out of some of the other presentations as well, was the point about walkability. For various reasons, walkability needs to be built into all our new developments. I'm going to go to Jonathan next, because certain things he said were absolutely vital. When he says getting it right first time where possible, is particularly important in the situation when you're about to be attacked by a hurricane. And I wish him every success in getting his small bite towards achieving sustainability and resilience and getting CRCP 10 accepted around the region. He showed us very clearly what the damage and costs result from the dangerous situation that we're living in. And I'm afraid he's absolutely right. We've been talking about these things for years, but we in the Caribbean are in a particular position of weakness, and in Barbados, we're in a position of terrible weakness with the vulnerability of our housing stock, and it needs to be addressed. So thank you, Jonathan, for highlighting that, and good luck with what you're getting on with. And then with Michelle, I'd like to thank her for saying particularly that facilities management issues and maintenance issues should start in the design phase of any development. That ties in with my own personal experience in the past, And I hope that everybody looking on today who happens to be a planner or an architect or a developer will take that on board and bring in the people who are going to be responsible for maintaining and managing the developments early on. Look at what the costs are and think of those costs in a long-term sense as well as a short-term sense, and come up with solutions which are sustainable, resilient, and work. So I'd like to thank her for that. And again, make a little point really that comes from my past experience in the UK. Some people will know I'm a real newcomer here. I've only been here for about 15 years. And prior to that, I worked in social housing and public housing in the UK. And we ended up pulling down developments which were 20 to 30 years old because of failures on management and maintenance, which could have been taken into account in that design phase. That is not sustainable, and we don't want it to happen in Barbados. So that's my final contribution point for the day. Bring in the management and maintenance early, and let's actually get our resilient and sustainable communities built. Thank you, Yolanda.
Thank you very much, Kim, for that vote of thanks to all those who participated. And now I would just like to say thank all of you for joining us for this discussion on World Town Planning Day. I think the comment made by Robert O, as he was in the chat, that it does really speak for us to go forward with this discussion at the government level and the community level and have wider engagement about how we need to move forward with how we design and manage our complete communities that are already been framed in our physical development plan. So with that, I would like to say that I hope that when we start to come out and reach out to all of you, that you will in fact continue the conversation and come to some form of some decisions in terms of how we implement these complete communities. And I thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right, bye all.
Thank you, bye.